Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of Inside the Americas. Coming up, Canada has the world's worst record for COVID-19 deaths of the elderly in retirement homes, 30% higher than other wealthy nations. A look at why on the way. Then we'll take you to the Colombia neighborhood dubbed the Port of Resistance. It's the epicenter of the protest movement against the government of Ivan Duque. And swimming, gymnastics, and skateboarding. Coming up, a look at the hottest new sport hitting this year's Summer Olympics. I'm Jeannie Godula. The most tragic COVID-19 legacy in Canada will be the deaths of the elderly in nursing homes. 7 out of 10 COVID-19 fatalities occurred in Canadian care homes used to house senior citizens. That's almost 30% more than in other nations. The worst hit provinces in Canada, Ontario and Quebec.
Nicole's mother was among 5,000 senior citizens who died during the first wave of the pandemic, but she didn't die from COVID-19.
8 days before her death, the doctor called to tell me that my mother was completely dehydrated.
Due to COVID restrictions, the nursing home went into lockdown. Nicole's mother, who was fine a few weeks before, was left to her own devices. There was not enough staff. The staff left behind were completely overwhelmed.
I was watching her on the camera I set up in her bedroom. I could see she was suffering.
Nicole was left helpless watching on her phone as her mother passed away. She's one of many victims, highlighting Quebec's long-term care crisis. According to the province, it's in many of these homes that nearly 3/4 of the region's COVID-19 victims died during the first wave.
Care homes weren't ready at all for this crisis.
Several inquiries have reached the same conclusion across Quebec and other provinces, including Ontario, where the pandemic's third wave rages on. The province is in lockdown. The third wave hit Toronto so hard it overtook Montreal as the epicenter of the pandemic. Candace Rennick has worked in healthcare for seniors for 20 years. She believes lessons weren't learned from the first wave.
What our members are experiencing is complete and total burnout, and the government has done nothing to retain and attract staff. So, in fact, the crisis has gotten much worse.
Here, the second wave has claimed more lives than the first. For-profit healthcare companies have seen large-scale outbreaks in the nursing homes they manage. Researcher Tamara Daly believes the company's business model needs to be reviewed.
The for-profit homes take funding out, so they're not adding to their staffing levels in the same way that you would find with public and nonprofit homes. In Canada, we don't tend to really value older people, like just as a general rule.
Quebec's health ministry is promising an exhaustive action plan and the end of private facilities without government funding. In Ontario, an independent public inquiry concluded there was no plan to protect residents in long-term care.
Colombia was hit with a national strike this week, the latest in weeks of protests. The anger began over a now shelved tax plan, but has since widened to include calls for a basic income, the withdrawal of a long-debated health reform, and also for an end to police violence. That last issue is a timely one following the deaths of at least 40 protesters. Here's more now from the epicenter of the ongoing protests, Colombia's third biggest city, Cali.
As the hotbed of Cali's resistance to Ivan Duque's government, the impoverished neighbourhood of Puerto Relena has been renamed Puerto Resistencia by demonstrators. Some of the fiercest clashes between police and protesters have taken place here.
Hay resistencia, porque tenemos resistencia.
Yo soy primera línea, primero porque no quiero que el gobierno siga ultrajando el pueblo como lo está ultrajando.
The protests in Colombia started on April the 28th as a general strike after the government's proposed tax increases on public services, fuel, wages and pensions sparked widespread anger. In response to rising tensions, the president withdrew the bill and the country's finance minister resigned. But the demonstrations have transformed into a broader anti-government movement, calling for action to tackle police violence and the withdrawal of a long-debated health reform. Major highways into Cali have been blockaded by demonstrators since the unrest began. preventing the arrival of food and fuel supplies. Some residents, while in favour of protest, are concerned by the shortages, the level of violence and the damage to property.
Obviamente hay que protestar por todas las inconsistencias que hay, pero no estoy de acuerdo con el vandalismo que se ha suscitado, con quemar los carros, con dañar los negocios.
Ya en la galería también ya todo se ha agotado y pues estamos pasando es con lo que se logra comprar ahí en la tienda, pero a un precios exagerados.
President Duque has been visiting Cali this week to address the tensions, saying that security forces would be mobilised to remove the blockades and to escort supplies into the city.
There were a lot of big stories out of the U.S. this week. Huge gas lines after a pipeline cyber attack, the Pfizer vaccine being okayed for kids as young as 12, and the not-so-great future for the Golden Globes. Brian Quinn takes a look.
America's largest fuel pipeline shut down for days amid one of the country's most disruptive ransomware attacks ever. After hackers from a criminal collective known as DarkSide compromised its network on May 7th, Colonial Pipeline was forced to idle nearly 9,000 kilometers of conduit from Houston, Texas to Linden, New Jersey, cutting off hundreds of millions of liters of gasoline, representing 45% of the Northeast's supply. Fuel prices there soon hit a 3-year high, with consumer groups warning against hoarding as shortages began to be felt amid a rush on gas stations. The U.S. oil industry, meanwhile, scrambling to tighten cybersecurity.
There's a lot more work to be done on securing critical infrastructure from penetration from the internet. Industrial systems should not have a connection to the internet.
Good news on the coronavirus front as U.S. regulators expanded their authorization of Pfizer's vaccine to children as young as 12. That follows a trial on over 2,000 volunteers aged 12 to 15, in which not a single case of COVID-19 was found among fully vaccinated children. Some 1.5 million cases have so far been diagnosed among unvaccinated 11 to 17-year-old Americans. The new approval is a boost for families and educators ahead of the reopening of schools this coming autumn. It should also help the U.S. expand its vaccine rollout at a time when hesitancy among some unvaccinated populations has slowed the immunization drive. And NBC has announced it will not air the Golden Globe ceremony next year as it waits for reform at the awards organizing body, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association. Netflix and Amazon also refusing to work with the group, Hollywood star Tom Cruise returning his 3 Golden Globes. The backlash comes after a damning report in the Los Angeles Times revealed that the HFPA has not a single black voting member and hasn't for the past 20 years. The article called out questionable financial practices and a lack of transparency in the awarding system, as well as racist and sexist remarks by its current members.
The scandal around the Globes will cause major change at the Globes. I'm not even sure the Globes as an association, the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, in its current structure will survive this scandal.
The HFPA has vowed to diversify its membership and implement transformational change.
Now, among the new sports set to debut at the Olympics in Tokyo this summer are karate, baseball, surfing, and skateboarding. There is a bit of controversy, though, surrounding that last one, as many people don't think the freewheeling, anti-conformist vibe of the sport fits in with the Olympic style. But for the athletes, skateboarding definitely has its space in the Summer Games. We went to meet the French team training in the birthplace of skateboarding, California.
All together and training under the California palm trees, Vincent Melot, Aurélien Giraud, and Vincent Matron are the 3 French athletes nearly qualified for the 2021 Olympics. And for them, the training here is no less intense than that of other professional athletes.
No, we don't
have a team that says you need to do this to win. It's not like a traditional sport. You need to spend as much time as possible on your board and fall off of it. That's how you learn.
Failing and starting over. That's how the 3 of them learned on streets and at the skate park. At only 24 years old, the Olympics are a challenge that they hadn't really considered.
We're really relaxed about the Olympics, so we're trying to not get too worked up about it.
Over the past few weeks, most of their time has been spent with sponsors. At the heart of skate culture are videos like this, shot over many months and compiled by brands of boards and clothing.
The Olympics is just a few hours in the life of a skater, and if it doesn't work out, well, then no one remembers you. But this, you see you at your best for 3 minutes, but you took a year to film it. So I'm definitely prouder of that than the Olympics. Unless I win, of course, I'd be happy.
But if the world of skateboarding is looking to the Olympics with some suspicion, it is also because the history of the sport is relatively recent. At 64 years old, David Ferry is one of the pioneers of the sport, created by surfers in California in the 1960s.
People wanted to have that same kind of feeling when the waves were not good. So, first came this. But the wheels were pretty dangerous. They didn't roll too well if the surface wasn't totally clean.
Together with his friends, he practiced in the empty pools of Los Angeles villas. In 1978, he traveled to France to promote skateboarding and even made the cover of one of the very first magazines devoted to the sport. For him, the Olympic Games are a major milestone.
It started off as delinquent kids having fun. When I was skateboarding, a popular bumper sticker was, skateboarding is not a crime. Well, skateboarding is now so not a crime, it's being accepted into the Olympics, and it's thrilling.
In Tokyo, a new page will be turned in the history of skateboarding. But for those who've gotten it all the way there, the hope is that it will not lose its soul.
Well, that wraps it up for this show. Thanks so much for watching, and see you again next time for all the news from north to south.